The Art of Public Speaking by Dale Carnegie and Joseph Berg Eisenwine. Section 13. Voice Charm. A cheerful temper, joined with innocence, will make beauty attractive, knowledge delightful, and wit good-natured. Joseph Addison, The Tattler. Poe said that the tone of beauty is sadness, but he was evidently thinking from cause to effect, not contrariwise, for sadness is rarely a producer of beauty. That is peculiarly the province of joy. The exquisite beauty of a sunset is not exhilarating, but tends to a sort of melancholy that is not far from delight. The haunting beauty of deep, quiet music holds more than a tinge of sadness. The lovely minor cadences of birdsong at twilight are almost depressing. The reason we are affected to sadness by certain forms of placid beauty is twofold. Movement is stimulating and joy-producing, while quietude leads to reflection, and reflection in turn often brings out the tone of regretful longing for that which is past. Secondly, quiet beauty produces a vague aspiration for the relatively unattainable, yet does not stimulate to the tremendous effort necessary to make the dimly desired state or object ours. We must distinguish for these reasons between the sadness of beauty and the joy of beauty. True joy is a deep inner thing, and takes in much more than the idea of bounding, sanguine spirits, for it includes a certain active contentedness of heart. In this chapter, however, the word will have its optimistic, exuberant connotation. We are thinking now of vivid, bright-eyed, laughing joy. Musical, joyous tones constitute voice charm, a subtle magnetism that is delightfully contagious. Now, it might seem to the desultory reader that to take the lancet and cut into this alluring voice quality would be to dissect a butterfly wing and so destroy its charm. Yet, how can we induce an effect if we are not certain as to the cause? Nasal resonance produces the bell tones of the voice. The tone passages of the nose must be kept entirely free for the bright tones of the voice. And after our warning in the preceding chapter, you will not confuse what is popularly and erroneously called a nasal tone with the true nasal quality, which is so well illustrated by the voice work of trained French singers and speakers. To develop nasal resonance, sing the following, dwelling as long as possible on the sounds. Pitch the voice in the nasal cavity. Practice both in high and low registers, and develop range with brightness. Sing, song. Ding, dong. Hong, kong. Long, thong. Practice in the falsetto voice develops a bright quality in the normal speaking voice. Try the following, and any other selections you choose, in a falsetto voice. A man's falsetto voice is extremely high and womanish, so men should not practice in falsetto after the exercise becomes tiresome. She perfectly scorned the best of his clan, and declared the ninth of any man a perfectly vulgar fraction. The actress Mary Anderson asked the poet Longfellow what she could do to improve her voice. He replied, "Read aloud daily, joyous lyric poetry." The joyous tones are the bright tones. Develop them by exercise. Practice your voice exercises in an attitude of joy. Under the influence of pleasure, the body expands, the tone passages open, the action of heart and lungs is accelerated, and all the primary conditions for good tone are established. More songs float out from the broken windows of the Negro cabins in the South than from the palatial homes on Fifth Avenue. Henry Ward Beecher said the happiest days of his life were not when he had become an international character, but when he was an unknown minister out in Lawrenceville, Ohio, sweeping his own church and working as a carpenter to help pay the grocer. Happiness is largely an attitude of mind, of viewing life from the right angle. The optimistic attitude can be cultivated, and it will express itself in voice charm. A telephone company recently placarded this motto in their booths: The voice with the smile wins. It does. Try it. Reading joyous prose or lyric poetry will help put smile and joy of soul into your voice. The following selections are excellent for practice. Remember that when you first practice these classics, you are to give sole attention to two things: a joyous attitude of heart and body, and bright tones of the voice. After these ends have been attained to your satisfaction, carefully review the principles of public speaking laid down in the preceding chapters, and put them into practice as you read these passages again and again. It would be better to commit each selection to memory. Selections for practice. From Milton's L'Allegro. Haste thee, nymph, and bring with thee jest, and youthful jollity, quips and cranks and wanton wiles, nods and becks and wreathed smiles, such as hang on Hebe's cheek, and love to live in dimple sleek. Sport that wrinkled care derides, and laughter holding both his sides. Come and trip it as ye go on the light fantastic toe, and in thy right hand lead with thee the mountain nymph, sweet Liberty. And if I give thee honour due, Mirth, admit me of thy crew, to live with her and live with thee in unreproved pleasures free. To hear the lark begin his flight, and singing, startle the dull night from his watch-tower in the skies, till the dappled dawn doth rise, then to come in spite of sorrow, and at my window bid good morrow through the sweetbriar, or the vine, or the twisted eglantine, while the cock with lively din scatters the rear of darkness thin, and to the stack or the barn door stoutly struts his dames before. Oft listening how the hounds and horn cheerly rouse the slumbering morn, from the side of some hoar hill, through the high wood echoing shrill, sometime walking not unseen by hedgerow elms on hillocks green, right against the eastern gate, where the great sun begins his state. Robed in flames and amber light, the clouds in thousand liveries dight, while the ploughman near at hand whistles o'er the furrowed land, and the milkmaid, singing blithe, and the mower whets his scythe, and every shepherd tells his tale under the hawthorn in the dale. The Sea. The sea, the open sea, the blue, the fresh, the fever-free, without a mark, without a bound, it runneth the earth's wide regions round. It plays with the clouds, it mocks the skies, or like a cradled creature lies. I'm on the sea. I'm on the sea. I am where I would ever be, with the blue above and the blue below, and silence wheresoe'er I go. If a storm should come and awake the deep, what matter? I shall ride and sleep. I love, oh how I love to ride on the fierce, foaming, bursting tide, where every mad wave drowns the moon, and whistles aloft its tempest tune, and tells how goeth the world below, and why the southwest wind doth blow. I never was on the dull tame shore, but I loved the great sea more and more, and backward flew to her billowy breast, like a bird that seeketh her mother's nest. And a mother she was and is to me, for I was born on the open sea. The waves were white, and red the morn in the noisy hour when I was born. The whale it whistled, the porpoise rolled, and the dolphins bared their backs of gold, and never was heard such an outcry wild as welcomed to life the ocean child. I have lived since then in calm and strife, full 50 summers a rover's life, with wealth to spend and a power to range, but never have sought or sighed for change. And death, whenever he comes to me, shall come on the wide, unbounded sea. Barry Cornwall. The sun does not shine for a few trees and flowers, but for the wide world's joy. The lonely pine upon the mountain top waves its sombre boughs and cries, "Thou art my sun." And the little meadow violet lifts its cup of blue and whispers with its perfumed breath, "Thou art my son." And the grain in 1,000 fields rustles in the wind and makes answer, "Thou art my son." And so God sits effulgent in heaven, not for a favored few, but for the universe of life, and there is no creature so poor or so low that he may not look up with childlike confidence and say, My Father, thou art mine. Henry Ward Beecher. The Lark. Bird of the wilderness, blithesome and cumberless, sweet be thy matin o'er moorland and lea. Emblem of happiness, blessed is thy dwelling place, O to abide in the desert with thee. Wild is thy lay and loud, far in the downy cloud, love gives it energy, love gave it birth. Where on thy dewy wing, where art thou journeying? Thy lay is in heaven, thy love is on earth. O'er fell and fountain sheen, o'er moor and mountain green, o'er the red streamer that heralds the day, over the cloudlet dim, over the rainbow's rim, musical cherubs soar, singing away. Then when the gloaming comes, low in the heather blooms, sweet will thy welcome and bed of love be. Emblem of happiness, blessed is thy dwelling place, O to abide in the desert with thee. James Hogg. In joyous conversation there is an elastic touch, a delicate stroke upon the central ideas, generally following a pause. This elastic touch adds vivacity to the voice. If you try repeatedly, it can be sensed by feeling the tongue strike the teeth. The entire absence of elastic touch in the voice can be observed in the thick tongue of the intoxicated man. Try to talk with the tongue lying still in the bottom of the mouth, and you will obtain largely the same effect. Vivacity of utterance is gained by using the tongue to strike off the emphatic idea with a decisive, elastic touch. Deliver the following with decisive strokes on the emphatic ideas. Deliver it in a vivacious manner, noting the elastic touch action of the tongue. A flexible, responsive tongue is absolutely essential to good voice work. From Napoleon's address to the Directory on his return from Egypt. What have you done with that brilliant France which I left you? I left you at peace, and I find you at war. I left you victorious, and I find you defeated. I left you the millions of Italy, and I find only spoliation and poverty. What have you done with 100,000 Frenchmen, my companions in glory? They are dead. This state of affairs cannot last long. In less than 3 years, it would plunge us into despotism. Practice the following selection for the development of elastic touch. Say it in a joyous spirit, using the exercise to develop voice charm in all the ways suggested in this chapter. The Brook. I come from haunts of coot and hern, I make a sudden sally, and sparkle out among the fern, to bicker down a valley. By 30 hills I hurry down, or slip between the ridges, by 20 thorps, a little town, and 100 bridges, till last by Philip's farm I flow to join the brimming river. For men may come, and men may go, but I go on forever. I chatter over stony ways in little sharps and trebles, I bubble into eddying bays, I babble on the pebbles. With many a curve my banks I fret, by many a field and fallow, and many a fairy foreland set with willow weed and mallow. I chatter, chatter as I flow to join the brimming river, for men may come, and men may go, but I go on forever. I wind about, and in and out, with here a blossom sailing, and here and there a lusty trout, and here and there a grayling, and here and there a foamy flake upon me as I travel, with many a silvery water break above the golden gravel, and draw them all along and flow to join the brimming river, for men may come and men may go, but I go on forever. I steal by lawns and grassy plots, I slide by hazel covers, I move the sweet forget-me-nots that grow for happy lovers. I slip, I slide, I gloom, I glance among my skimming swallows. I make the netted sunbeam dance against my sandy shallows. I murmur under moon and stars in brambly wildernesses. I linger by my shingly bars. I loiter round my cresses. And out again I curve and flow to join the brimming river, for men may come, and men may go, but I go on forever. Alfred Tennyson. The children at play on the street, glad from sheer physical vitality, display a resonance and charm in their voices quite different from the voices that float through the silent halls of the hospitals. A skilled physician can tell much about his patient's condition from the mere sound of the voice. Failing health, or even physical weariness, tells through the voice. It is always well to rest, and be entirely refreshed before attempting to deliver a public address. As to health, neither scope nor space permits us to discuss here the laws of hygiene. There are many excellent books on this subject. In the reign of Roman Emperor Tiberius, one senator wrote to another, "To the wise, a word is sufficient." The apparel oft proclaims the man. The voice always does. It is one of the greatest revealers of character. The superficial woman, the brutish man, the reprobate, the person of culture often discloses inner nature in the voice, for even the cleverest dissembler cannot entirely prevent its tones and qualities being affected by the slightest change of thought or emotion. In anger it becomes high, harsh, and unpleasant. In love, low, soft, and melodious. The variations are as limitless as they are fascinating to observe. Visit a theatrical hotel in a large city, and listen to the buzz-saw voices of the chorus girls from some burlesque attraction. The explanation is simple. Buzz-saw lives. Emerson said, "When a man lives with God, his voice shall be as sweet as the murmur of the brook, or the rustle of the corn." It is impossible to think selfish thoughts and have either an attractive personality, a lovely character, or a charming voice. If you want to possess voice charm, cultivate a deep, sincere sympathy for mankind. Love will shine out through your eyes and proclaim itself in your tones. One secret of the sweetness of the canary's song may be his freedom from tainted thoughts. Your character beautifies or mars your voice. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is his voice. Questions and exercises. 1. Define A. Charm. B. Joy. C. Beauty. 2. Make a list of all the words related to joy. 3. Write a 3-minute eulogy of the joyful man. 4. Deliver it without the use of notes. Have you carefully considered all the qualities that go to make up voice charm in its delivery? 5. Tell briefly, in your own words, what means may be employed to develop a charming voice. 6. Discuss the effect of voice on character. 7. Discuss the effect of character on voice. 8. Analyze the voice charm of any speaker or singer you choose. 9. Analyze the defects of any given voice. 10. Make a short, humorous speech imitating certain voice defects, pointing out reasons. 11. Commit the following stanza and interpret each phrase of delight, suggested or expressed by the poet. An infant when it gazes on a light. A child the moment when it drains the breast. A devotee when soars the host in sight. An Arab with a stranger for a guest. A sailor when the prize has struck in fight. A miser filling his most hoarded chest. Feel rapture, but not such true joy are reaping as they who watch o'er what they love while sleeping. Byron, Don Juan. End of section 13.
Section 14. Distinctness and precision of utterance. In man speaks God. Hesiod, Words and Days. And endless are the modes of speech, and far extends from side to side the field of words. Homer, Iliad. In popular usage, the terms pronunciation, enunciation, and articulation are synonymous. But real pronunciation includes three distinct processes and may therefore be defined as the utterance of a syllable or a group of syllables with regard to articulation, accentuation, and enunciation. Distinct and precise utterance is one of the most important considerations of public speech. How preposterous it is to hear a speaker making sounds of inarticulate earnestness under the contented delusion that he is telling something to his audience. Telling means communicating. And how can he actually communicate without making every word distinct? Slovenly pronunciation results from either physical deformity or habit. A surgeon or a surgeon-dentist may correct a deformity, but your own will, working by self-observation and resolution in drill, will break a habit. All depends on whether you think it worthwhile. Defective speech is so widespread that freedom from it is the exception. It is painfully common to hear public speakers mutilate the King's English. If they do not actually murder it, as Curran once said, they often knock an I out, the letter I. A Canadian clergyman, writing in the Homiletic Review, relates that in his student days, quote, a classmate who was an Englishman supplied a country church for a Sunday. On the following Monday he conducted a missionary meeting. In the course of his address he said some farmers thought they were doing their duty toward missions when they gave their hods and hens to the work, but the Lord required more. At the close of the meeting, a young woman seriously said to a friend, I am sure the farmers do well if they give their hogs and hens to missions. It is more than most people can afford. It is insufferable effrontery for any man to appear before an audience who persists in driving the H out of happiness, home, and heaven, and to paraphrase Waldo Masaros, will not let it rest in hell. He who does not show enough self-knowledge to see in himself such glaring faults, nor enough self-mastery to correct them, has no business to instruct others. If he can do no better, he should be silent. If he will do no better, he should also be silent. Barring incurable physical defects, and few are incurable nowadays, the whole matter is one of will. The catalogue of those who have done the impossible by faithful work is as inspiring as a roll call of warriors. The less there is of you, says Nathan Shepherd, the more need for you to make the most of what there is of you. Articulation. Articulation is the forming and joining of the elementary sounds of speech. It seems an appalling task to utter articulately the third of 1,000,000 words that go to make up our English vocabulary. But the way to make a beginning is really simple. Learn to utter correctly and with easy change from one to the other each of the 44 elementary sounds in our language. The reasons why articulation is so painfully slurred by a great many public speakers are 4. Ignorance of the elemental sounds, failure to discriminate between sounds nearly alike, a slovenly, lazy use of the vocal organs, and a torpid will. Anyone who is still master of himself will know how to handle each of these defects. The vowel sounds are the most vexing source of errors, especially where diphthongs are found. Who has not heard such errors as are hit off in this inimitable verse by Oliver Wendell Holmes? Learning condemns beyond the reach of hope the careless lips that speak of sop for soap. Her edict exiles from her fair abode the clownish voice that utters rod for road. Less stern to him who calls his coat a caught, and steers his boat believing it a bought. She pardoned one, our classic city's boast, who said at Cambridge most instead of most, but knit her brows and stamped her angry foot to hear a teacher call a root a root. The foregoing examples are all monosyllables, but bad articulation is frequently the result of joining sounds that do not belong together. For example, no one finds it difficult to say beauty, but may persist in pronouncing duty as though it were spelled either duty or juty. It is not only from untaught speakers that we hear such slovenly articulations as column for column and pretty for pretty, but even great orators occasionally offend quite as unblushingly as less noted mortals. Nearly all such errors are of carelessness, not of pure ignorance, of carelessness, because the ear never tries to hear what the lips articulate. It must be exasperating to a foreigner to find that the elemental sound oo gives him no hint for the pronunciation of bow, cough, rough, thorough, and through. And we can well forgive even a man of culture who occasionally loses his way amidst the intricacies of English articulation. But there can be no excuse for the slovenly utterance of the simple vowel sounds which form at once the life and the beauty of our language. He who is too lazy to speak distinctly should hold his tongue. The consonant sounds occasion serious trouble only for those who do not look with care at the spelling of words about to be pronounced. Nothing but carelessness can account for saying Jacob Baptist Sevem always or satisfy. He that hath yaws to yaw, let him yaw, is the rendering which an Anglophobiac clergyman gave to the familiar scripture. He that hath ears to hear, let him hear. After hearing the name of Sir Humphrey Davy pronounced, a Frenchman, who wished to write to the eminent Englishman, thus addressed the letter Sirum Fridavi. Accentuation. Accentuation is the stressing of the proper syllables in words. This it is that is properly called pronunciation. For instance, we properly say that a word is mispronounced when it is accented invite instead of invite, though it is really an offense against only one form of pronunciation, accentuation. It is the work of a lifetime to learn the accents of a large vocabulary and to keep pace with changing usage. But an alert ear, the study of word origins, and the dictionary habit will prove to be mighty helpers in a task that can never be finally completed. Enunciation. Correct enunciation is the complete utterance of all the sounds of a syllable or a word. Wrong articulation gives the wrong sound to the vowel or vowels of a word or a syllable, as do for do, or unites two sounds improperly, as hully for holy. Wrong enunciation is the incomplete utterance of a syllable or a word, the sound omitted or added being usually consonantal. To say necessity instead of necessity is a wrong articulation. To say doing for doing is improper enunciation. The one articulates, that is, joints, two sounds that should not be joined, and thus gives the word a positively wrong sound. The other fails to touch all the sounds in the word, and in that particular way also sounds the word incorrectly. My text may be found in the 5th and 6th verses of the 2nd chapter of Titus, and the subject of my discourse is the government of our homes. Footnote number 6. School and college speaker, Mitchell. What did this preacher do with his final consonants? This slovenly dropping of essential sounds is as offensive as the common habit of running words together so that they lose their individuality and distinctness. Light and dark, up and down, don't you know, particular, examination are all too common to need comment. Imperfect enunciation is due to lack of attention and to lazy lips. It can be corrected by resolutely attending to the formation of syllables as they are uttered. Flexible lips will enunciate difficult combinations of sounds without slighting any of them, but such flexibility cannot be attained except by habitually uttering words with distinctness and accuracy. A daily exercise in enunciating a series of sounds will in a short time give flexibility to the lips and alertness to the mind, so that no word will be uttered without receiving its due complement of sound. Returning to our definition, we see that when the sounds of a word are properly articulated, the right syllables accented, and full value given to each sound in its enunciation, we have correct pronunciation. Perhaps one word of caution is needed here, lest anyone anxious to bring out clearly every sound should overdo the matter and neglect the unity and smoothness of pronunciation. Be careful not to bring syllables into so much prominence as to make words seem long and angular. The joints must be kept decently dressed. Before delivery, do not fail to go over your manuscript and note every sound that may possibly be mispronounced. Consult the dictionary and make assurance doubly sure. If the arrangement of words is unfavorable to clear enunciation, change either words or order, and do not rest until you can follow Hamlet's directions to the players. Questions and exercises. 1. Practice repeating the following rapidly, paying particular attention to the consonants. Foolish Flavius, flushing feverishly, fiercely found fault with Flora's frivolity. Footnote number 7. School and college speaker, Mitchell. Mary's matchless mimicry makes much mischief. Seated on shining shale, she sells sea-shells. You youngsters yielded your youthful Yuletide yearnings yesterday. 2. Sound the L in each of the following words repeated in sequence. Blue black blinkers blocked black blondin's eyes. 3. Did you say a blue or a blue sky. 4. Compare the U sound in few and in new. Say each aloud and decide which is correct. New York, New York, or New York. 5. Pay careful heed to the directions of this chapter in reading the following from Hamlet. After the interview with the ghost of his father, Hamlet tells his friends Horatio and Marcellus that he intends to act a part. Horatio. O day and night, but this is wondrous strange. Hamlet. And therefore as a stranger give it welcome. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. But come, here as before, never, so help your mercy, how strange or odd soe'er I bear myself, as I perchance hereafter I shall think meet to put an antic disposition on, that you at such times seeing me never shall with arms encumbered thus, or this head shake, or by pronouncing of some doubtful phrase, as well, well, we know, or we could, and if we would, or if we list to speak, or there be an if there might, or such ambiguous giving out to note that you know aught of me. This not to do, so grace and mercy at your most need help you swear. Act 1, Scene 5. 6. Make a list of common errors of pronunciation, saying which are due to faulty articulation, wrong accentuation, and incomplete enunciation. In each case, make the correction. 7. Criticize any speech you may have heard which displayed these faults. 8. Explain how the false shame of seeming to be too precise may hinder us from cultivating perfect verbal utterance. 9. Overprecision is likewise a fault. To bring out any syllable unduly is to caricature the word. Be moderate in reading the following. The last speech of Maximilien de Robespierre. The enemies of the Republic call me tyrant. Were I such, they would grovel at my feet. I should gorge them with gold. I should grant them immunity for their crimes, and they would be grateful. Were I such, the kings we have vanquished, far from denouncing Robespierre, would lend me their guilty support. There would be a covenant between them and me. Tyranny must have tools. But the enemies of tyranny, whither does their path end? To the tomb and to immortality. What tyrant is my protector? To what faction do I belong? Yourselves. What faction, since the beginning of the Revolution, has crushed and annihilated so many detected traitors? You, the people, our principles, are that faction, a faction to which I am devoted and against which all the scoundrelism of the day is banded. The confirmation of the Republic has been my object, and I know that the Republic can be established only on the eternal basis of morality. Against me and against those who hold kindred principles the League is formed. My life? Oh, my life I abandon without a regret. I have seen the past, and I foresee the future. What friend of this country would wish to survive the moment when he could no longer serve it? when he could no longer defend innocence against oppression? Wherefore should I continue in an order of things where intrigue eternally triumphs over truth, where justice is mocked, where passions the most abject, or fears the most absurd, override the sacred interests of humanity? In witnessing the multitude of vices which the torrent of the Revolution has rolled in turbid communion with its civic virtues, I confess that I have sometimes feared that I should be sullied in the eyes of posterity by the impure neighborhood of unprincipled men who had thrust themselves into association with the sincere friends of humanity. And I rejoice that these conspirators against my country have now, by their reckless rage, traced deep the line of demarcation between themselves and all true men. Question history, and learn how all the defenders of liberty in all times have been overwhelmed by calumny, but their traducers died also. The good and the bad disappear alike from the earth, but in very different conditions. O Frenchmen, O my countrymen, let not your enemies, with their desolating doctrines, degrade your souls and enervate your virtues. No, Chalmette, no, death is not an eternal sleep. Citizens, efface from the tomb that motto, graven by sacrilegious hands, which spreads over all nature a funereal crape, takes from oppressed innocence its support, and affronts the beneficent dispensation of death. Inscribe rather thereon these words: Death is the commencement of immortality. I leave to the oppressors of the people a terrible testament, which I proclaim with the independence befitting one whose career is so nearly ended. It is the awful truth: thou shalt die. End of section 14.
Section 15. The Truth about Gesture. When Whitefield acted an old blind man advancing by slow steps toward the edge of the precipice, Lord Chesterfield started up and cried, "Good God, he is gone!" Nathan Sheppard, Before an Audience. Gesture is really a simple matter that requires observation and common sense rather than a book of rules. Gesture is an outward expression of an inward condition. It is merely an effect, the effect of a mental or an emotional impulse struggling for expression through physical avenues. You must not, however, begin at the wrong end. If you are troubled by your gestures or a lack of gestures, attend to the cause, not the effect. It will not in the least help matters to tack on to your delivery a few mechanical movements. If the tree in your front yard is not growing to suit you, fertilize and water the soil and let the tree have sunshine. Obviously, it will not help your tree to nail on a few branches. If your cistern is dry, wait till it rains, or bore a well. Why plunge a pump into a dry hole? The speaker whose thoughts and emotions are welling within him like a mountain spring will not have much trouble to make gestures. It will be merely a question of properly directing them. If his enthusiasm for his subject is not such as to give him a natural impulse for dramatic action, it will avail nothing to furnish him with a long list of rules. He may tack on some movements, but they will look like the wilted branches nailed to a tree to simulate life. Gestures must be born, not built. A wooden horse may amuse the children, but it takes a live one to go somewhere. It is not only impossible to lay down definite rules on this subject, but it would be silly to try, for everything depends on the speech, the occasion, the personality and feelings of the speaker, and the attitude of the audience. It is easy enough to forecast the result of multiplying 7 by 6, but it is impossible to tell any man what kind of gestures he will be impelled to use when he wishes to show his earnestness. We may tell him that many speakers close the hand, with the exception of the forefinger, and pointing that finger straight at the audience pour out their thoughts like a volley; or that others stamp one foot for emphasis; or that Mr. Bryan often slaps his hands together for great force, holding one palm upward in an easy manner; or that Gladstone would sometimes make a rush at the clerk's table in Parliament and smite it with his hand so forcefully that Disraeli once brought down the House by grimly congratulating himself that such a barrier stood between himself and "the honourable gentleman." All these things, and a bookful more, may we tell the speaker, but we cannot know whether he can use these gestures or not, any more than we can decide whether he could wear Mr. Bryan's clothes. The best that can be done on this subject is to offer a few practical suggestions, and let personal good taste decide as to where effective dramatic action ends and extravagant motion begins. Any gesture that merely calls attention to itself is bad. The purpose of a gesture is to carry your thought and feeling into the minds and hearts of your hearers. This it does by emphasizing your message, by interpreting it, by expressing it in action, by striking its tone in either a physically descriptive, a suggestive, or a typical gesture; and let it be remembered all the time that gesture includes all physical movement, from facial expression and the tossing of the head to the expressive movements of hand and foot. A shifting of the pose may be a most effective gesture. What is true of gesture is true of all life. If the people on the street turn around and watch you walk, your walk is more important than you are. Change it. If the attention of your audience is called to your gestures, they are not convincing, because they appear to be, what they have a doubtful right to be in reality, studied. Have you ever seen a speaker use such grotesque gesticulations that you were fascinated by their frenzy of oddity, but could not follow his thought? Do not smother ideas with gymnastics. Savonarola would rush down from the high pulpit among the congregation in the Duomo at Florence and carry the fire of conviction to his hearers. Billy Sunday slides to base on the platform carpet in dramatizing one of his baseball illustrations. Yet in both instances the message has somehow stood out bigger than the gesture. It is chiefly in calm afterthought that men have remembered the form of dramatic expression. When Sir Henry Irving made his famous exit as Shylock, the last thing the audience saw was his pallid, avaricious hand extended skinny and claw-like against the background. At the time, everyone was overwhelmed by the tremendous typical quality of this gesture. Now we have time to think of its art and discuss its realistic power. Only when gesture is subordinated to the absorbing importance of the idea, a spontaneous, living expression of living truth, is it justifiable at all, and when it is remembered for itself, as a piece of unusual physical energy or as a poem of grace, it is a dead failure as dramatic expression. There is a place for a unique style of walking. It is the circus or the cakewalk. There is a place for surprisingly rhythmical evolutions of arms and legs. It is on the dance floor or the stage. Don't let your agility and grace put your thoughts out of business. One of the present writers took his first lessons in gesture from a certain college president who knew far more about what had happened at the Diet of Worms than he did about how to express himself in action. His instructions were to start the movement on a certain word, continue it on a precise curve, and unfold the fingers at the conclusion, ending with the forefinger, just so. Plenty, and more than plenty, has been published on this subject, giving just such silly directions. Gesture is a thing of mentality and feeling, not a matter of geometry. Remember, whenever a pair of shoes, a method of pronunciation, or a gesture calls attention to itself, it is bad. When you have made really good gestures in a good speech, your hearers will not go away saying, "What beautiful gestures he made!" but they will say, "I'll vote for that measure." "He is right. I believe in that." Gestures should be born of the moment. The best actors and public speakers rarely know in advance what gestures they are going to make. They make one gesture on certain words tonight, and none at all tomorrow night at the same point. Their various moods and interpretations govern their gestures. It is all a matter of impulse and intelligent feeling with them. Don't overlook that word, intelligent. Nature does not always provide the same kind of sunsets or snowflakes, and the movements of a good speaker vary almost as much as the creations of nature. Now all this is not to say that you must not take some thought for your gestures. If that were meant, why this chapter? When the sergeant despairingly besought the recruit in the awkward squad to step out and look at himself, he gave splendid advice, and worthy of personal application. Particularly while you are in the learning days of public speaking, you must learn to criticize your own gestures. Recall them, see where they were useless, crude, awkward, what not, and do better next time. There is a vast deal of difference between being conscious of self and being self-conscious. It will require your nice discrimination in order to cultivate spontaneous gestures and yet give due attention to practice. While you depend upon the moment, it is vital to remember that only a dramatic genius can effectively accomplish such feats as we have related of Whitefield, Savonarola, and others. And doubtless, the first time they were used, they came in a burst of spontaneous feeling. Yet Whitefield declared that not until he had delivered a sermon 40 times was its delivery perfected. What spontaneity initiates, let practice complete. Every effective speaker and every vivid actor has observed, considered, and practiced gesture until his dramatic actions are a subconscious possession, just like his ability to pronounce correctly without especially concentrating his thought. Every able platform man has possessed himself of a dozen ways in which he might depict in gesture any given emotion. In fact, the means for such expression are endless. And this is precisely why it is both useless and harmful to make a chart of gestures and enforce them as the ideals of what may be used to express this or that feeling. Practice descriptive, suggestive, and typical movements until they come as naturally as a good articulation, and rarely forecast the gestures you will use at a given moment. Leave everything to that moment. Avoid monotony in gesture. Roast beef is an excellent dish, but it would be terrible as an exclusive diet. No matter how effective one gesture is, do not overwork it. Put variety into your actions. Monotony will destroy all beauty and power. The pump handle makes one effective gesture, and on hot days that one is very eloquent, but it has its limitations. Any movement that is not significant weakens. Do not forget that. Restlessness is not expression. A great many useless movements will only take the attention of the audience from what you are saying. A widely noted man introduced the speaker of the evening one Sunday lately to a New York audience. The only thing remembered about that introductory speech is that the speaker played nervously with the covering of the table as he talked. We naturally watch moving objects. A janitor putting down a window can take the attention of the hearers from Mr. Roosevelt. By making a few movements at one side of the stage, a chorus girl may draw the interest of the spectators from a big scene between the leads. When our forefathers lived in caves, they had to watch moving objects, for movements meant danger. We have not yet overcome the habit. Advertisers have taken advantage of it. Witness the moving electric light signs in any city. A shrewd speaker will respect this law and conserve the attention of his audience by eliminating all unnecessary movements. Gesture should either be simultaneous with or precede the words, not follow them. Lady Macbeth says, "Bear welcome in your eye, your hand, your tongue." Reverse this order and you get comedy. Say, "There he goes," pointing at him after you have finished your words, and see if the result is not comical. Do not make short, jerky movements. Some speakers seem to be imitating a waiter who has failed to get a tip. Let your movements be easy and from the shoulder, as a rule, rather than from the elbow. But do not go to the other extreme and make too many flowing motions. That savors of the lackadaisical. Put a little punch and life into your gestures. You cannot, however, do this mechanically. The audience will detect it if you do. They may not know just what is wrong, but the gesture will have a false appearance to them. Facial expression is important. Have you ever stopped in front of a Broadway theater and looked at the photographs of the cast? Notice the row of chorus girls who are supposed to be expressing fear. Their attitudes are so mechanical that the attempt is ridiculous. Notice the picture of the star expressing the same emotion. His muscles are drawn, his eyebrows lifted, he shrinks, and fear shines through his eyes. That actor felt fear when the photograph was taken. The chorus girls felt that it was time for a rare bit, and more nearly expressed that emotion than they did fear. Incidentally, that is one reason why they stay in the chorus. The movements of the facial muscles may mean a great deal more than the movements of the hand. The man who sits in a dejected heap with a look of despair on his face is expressing his thoughts and feelings just as effectively as the man who is waving his arms and shouting from the back of a dray wagon. The eye has been called the window of the soul. Through it shines the light of our thoughts and feelings. Do not use too much gesture. As a matter of fact, in the big crises of life we do not go through many actions. When your closest friend dies, you do not throw up your hands and talk about your grief. You are more likely to sit and brood in dry-eyed silence. The Hudson River does not make much noise on its way to the sea. It is not half so loud as the little creek up in Bronx Park that a bullfrog could leap across. The barking dog never tears your trousers. At least they say he doesn't. Do not fear the man who waves his arms and shouts his anger, but the man who comes up quietly with eyes flaming and face burning may knock you down. Fuss is not force. Observe these principles in nature and practice them in your delivery. The writer of this chapter once observed an instructor drilling a class in gesture. They had come to the passage from Henry VIII in which the humbled cardinal says, "Farewell, a long farewell to all my greatness." It is one of the pathetic passages of literature. A man uttering such a sentiment would be crushed, and the last thing on earth he would do would be to make flamboyant movements. Yet this class had an elocutionary manual before them that gave an appropriate gesture for every occasion, from paying the gas bill to deathbed farewells. So they were instructed to throw their arms out at full length on each side and say, "Farewell, a long farewell to all my greatness." Such a gesture might possibly be used in an after-dinner speech at the convention of a telephone company whose lines extended from the Atlantic to the Pacific, but to think of Wolsey's using that movement would suggest that his fate was just. Posture. The physical attitude to be taken before the audience really is included in gesture. Just what that attitude should be depends, not on rules, but on the spirit of the speech and the occasion. Senator La Follette stood for 3 hours with his weight thrown on his forward foot as he leaned out over the footlights, ran his fingers through his hair, and flamed out a denunciation of the trusts. It was very effective. But imagine a speaker taking that kind of position to discourse on the development of road-making machinery. If you have a fiery, aggressive message, and will let yourself go, nature will naturally pull your weight to your forward foot. A man in a hot political argument or a street brawl never has to stop to think upon which foot he should throw his weight. You may sometimes place your weight on your back foot if you have a restful and calm message. But don't worry about it. Just stand like a man who genuinely feels what he is saying. Do not stand with your heels close together like a soldier or a butler. No more should you stand with them wide apart like a traffic policeman. Use simple good manners and common sense. Here a word of caution is needed. We have advised you to allow your gestures and postures to be spontaneous and not woodenly prepared beforehand, but do not go to the extreme of ignoring the importance of acquiring mastery of your physical movements. A muscular hand made flexible by free movement is far more likely to be an effective instrument in gesture than a stiff, pudgy bunch of fingers. If your shoulders are lithe and carried well, while your chest does not retreat from association with your chin, the chances of using good extemporaneous gestures are so much the better. Learn to keep the back of your neck touching your collar, hold your chest high, and keep down your waist measure. So attention to strength, poise, flexibility, and grace of body are the foundations of good gesture, for they are expressions of vitality, and without vitality no speaker can enter the kingdom of power. When an awkward giant like Abraham Lincoln rose to the sublimest heights of oratory, he did so because of the greatness of his soul. His very ruggedness of spirit and artless honesty were properly expressed in his gnarly body. The fire of character, of earnestness, and of message swept his hearers before him when the tepid words of an insincere Apollo would have left no effect. But be sure you are a second Lincoln before you despise the handicap of physical awkwardness. Ty Cobb has confided to the public that when he was in a batting slump he even stands before a mirror, bat in hand, to observe the swing and follow-through of his batting form. If you would learn to stand well before an audience, look at yourself in a mirror, but not too often. Practice walking and standing before the mirror, so as to conquer awkwardness, not to cultivate a pose. Stand on the platform in the same easy manner that you would use before guests in a drawing-room. If your position is not graceful, make it so by dancing, gymnasium work, and by getting grace and poise in your mind. Do not continually hold the same position. Any big change of thought necessitates a change of position. Be at home. There are no rules, it is all a matter of taste. While on the platform, forget that you have any hands until you desire to use them. Then remember them effectively. Gravity will take care of them. Of course, if you want to put them behind you or fold them once in a while, it is not going to ruin your speech. Thought and feeling are the big things in speaking, not the position of a foot or a hand. Simply put your limbs where you want them to be. You have a will, so do not neglect to use it. Let us reiterate, do not despise practice. Your gestures and movements may be spontaneous and still be wrong. No matter how natural they are, it is possible to improve them. It is impossible for anyone, even yourself, to criticize your gestures until after they are made. You can't prune a peach tree until it comes up. Therefore speak much, and observe your own speech. While you are examining yourself, do not forget to study statuary and paintings to see how the great portrayers of nature have made their subjects express ideas through action. Notice the gestures of the best speakers and actors. Observe the physical expression of life everywhere. The leaves on the tree respond to the slightest breeze. The muscles of your face, the light of your eyes, should respond to the slightest change of feeling. Emerson says, "Every man that I meet is my superior in some way. In that I learn of him." Illiterate Italians make gestures so wonderful and beautiful that Booth or Barrett might have sat at their feet and been instructed. Open your eyes. Emerson says again, "We are immersed in beauty, but our eyes have no clear vision." Toss this book to one side. Go out and watch one child plead with another for a bite of apple. See a street brawl. Observe life in action. Do you want to know how to express victory? Watch the victor's hands go high on election night. Do you want to plead a cause? Make a composite photograph of all the pleaders in daily life you constantly see. Beg, borrow, and steal the best you can get, but don't give it out as theft. Assimilate it until it becomes a part of you. Then let the expression come out. Questions and exercises. 1. From what source do you intend to study gesture? 2. What is the first requisite of good gestures? Why? 3. Why is it impossible to lay down steel-clad rules for gesturing? 4. Describe a graceful gesture that you have observed, b. a forceful one, c. an extravagant one, d. an inappropriate one. 5. What gestures do you use for emphasis? Why? 6. How can grace of movement be acquired? 7. When in doubt about a gesture, what would you do? 8. What, according to your observations before a mirror, are your faults in gesturing? 9. How do you intend to correct them? 10. What are some of the gestures, if any, that you might use in delivering Thurston's speech, page 50, Grady's speech, page 36? Be specific. 11. Describe some particularly appropriate gesture that you have observed. Why was it appropriate? 12. Cite at least 3 movements in nature that might well be imitated in gesture. 13. What would you gather from the expressions descriptive gesture, suggestive gesture, and typical gesture? 14. Select any elemental emotion, such as fear, and try, by picturing in your mind at least 5 different situations that might call forth this emotion, to express its several phases by gesture, including posture, movement, and facial expression. 15. Do the same thing for such other emotions as you may select. 16. Select 3 passages from any source, only being sure that they are suitable for public delivery. Memorize each, and then devise gestures suitable for each. Say why. 17. Criticize the gestures in any speech you have heard recently. 18. Practice flexible movement of the hand. What exercises did you find useful? 19. Carefully observe some animal, then devise several typical gestures. 20. Write a brief dialogue between any 2 animals. Read it aloud and invent expressive gestures. 21. Deliver with appropriate gestures the quotation that heads this chapter. 22. Read aloud the following incident using dramatic gestures. Quote, When Voltaire was preparing a young actress to appear in one of his tragedies, he tied her hands to her sides with pack-thread in order to check her tendency toward exuberant gesticulation. Under this condition of compulsory immobility, she commenced to rehearse, and for some time she bore herself calmly enough. But at last, completely carried away by her feelings, she burst her bonds and flung up her arms. Alarmed at her supposed neglect of his instructions, she began to apologize to the poet. He smilingly reassured her, however. The gesture was then admirable, because it was irrepressible. Redway, The Actor's Art. 23. Render the following with suitable gestures. One day, while preaching, Whitefield suddenly assumed a nautical air and manner that were irresistible with him, and broke forth in these words, Well, my boys, we have a clear sky and are making fine headway over a smooth sea before a light breeze, and we shall soon lose sight of land. But what means this sudden lowering of the heavens, and that dark cloud arising from beneath the western horizon? Hark! Don't you hear distant thunder? Don't you see those flashes of lightning? There is a storm gathering. Every man to his duty. The air is dark, the tempest rages. Our masts are gone. The ship is on her beam ends. What next? At this, a number of sailors in the congregation, utterly swept away by the dramatic description, leaped to their feet and cried, "The longboat! Take to the longboat!" Nathan Shepard, Before an Audience. End of section 15.
Chapter 16. Methods of Delivery. The crown, the consummation of the discourse is its delivery. Toward it all preparation looks. For it the audience waits. By it the speaker is judged. All the forces of the orator's life converge in his oratory. the logical acuteness with which he marshals the facts around his theme, the rhetorical facility with which he orders his language, the control to which he has attained in the use of his body as a single organ of expression, whatever richness of acquisition and experience are his, these are all now incidents. The fact is the sending of his message home to his hearers. The hour of delivery is the supreme inevitable hour for the orator. It is this fact that makes lack of adequate preparation such an impertinence, and it is this that sends such thrills of indescribable joy through the orator's whole being when he has achieved a success. It is like the mother forgetting her pangs for the joy of bringing a son into the world. J.B.E. How to Attract and Hold an Audience. There are 4 fundamental methods of delivering an address. All others are modifications of one or more of these: reading from manuscript, committing the written speech and speaking from memory, speaking from notes, and extemporaneous speech. It is impossible to say which form of delivery is best for all speakers in all circumstances. In deciding for yourself, you should consider the occasion, the nature of the audience, the character of your subject, and your own limitations of time and ability. However, it is worth while warning you not to be lenient in self-exaction. Say to yourself courageously, "What others can do, I can attempt." A bold spirit conquers where others flinch, and a trying task challenges pluck. Reading from manuscript. This method really deserves short shrift in a book on public speaking, for, delude yourself as you may, public reading is not public speaking. Yet there are so many who grasp this broken reed for support that we must here discuss the read speech, apologetic misnomer as it is. Certainly there are occasions, among them the opening of Congress, the presentation of a sore question before a deliberative body, or a historical commemoration, when it may seem not alone to the orator, but to all those interested, that the chief thing is to express certain thoughts in precise language, in language that must not be either misunderstood or misquoted. At such times, oratory is unhappily elbowed to a back bench. The manuscript is solemnly withdrawn from the capacious inner pocket of the new frock coat, and every one settles himself resignedly, with only a feeble flicker of hope that the so-called speech may not be as long as it is thick. The words may be golden, but the hearer's eyes are prone to be leaden, and in about 1 instance out of 100 does the perpetrator really deliver an impressive address. His excuse is his apology. He is not to be blamed, as a rule, for someone decreed that it would be dangerous to cut loose from manuscript moorings and take his audience with him on a really delightful sail. One great trouble on such great occasions is that the essayist, for such he is, has been chosen not because of his speaking ability, but because his grandfather fought in a certain battle, or his constituents sent him to Congress, or his gifts in some line of endeavor other than speaking have distinguished him. As well choose a surgeon from his ability to play golf. To be sure, it always interests an audience to see a great man. Because of his eminence, they are likely to listen to his words with respect, perhaps with interest, even when droned from a manuscript. But how much more effective such a deliverance would be if the papers were cast aside! Nowhere is the read address so common as in the pulpit. The pulpit that in these days least of all can afford to invite a handicap. Doubtless many clergymen prefer finish to fervor. Let them choose. They are rarely men who sway the masses to acceptance of their message. What they gain in precision and elegance of language, they lose in force. There are just 4 motives that can move a man to read his address or sermon. 1. Laziness is the commonest. Enough said. Even heaven cannot make a lazy man efficient. 2. A memory so defective that he really cannot speak without reading. Alas, he is not speaking when he is reading, so his dilemma is painful, and not to himself alone. But no man has a right to assume that his memory is utterly bad until he has buckled down to memory culture and failed. A weak memory is oftener an excuse than a reason. 3. A genuine lack of time to do more than write the speech. There are such instances, but they do not occur every week. The disposition of your time allows more flexibility than you realize. Motive 3 too often harnesses up with motive 1. 4. A conviction that the speech is too important to risk forsaking the manuscript. But if it is vital that every word should be so precise, the style so polished, and the thoughts so logical, that the preacher must write a sermon entire, is not the message important enough to warrant extra effort in perfecting its delivery? It is an insult to a congregation, and disrespectful to Almighty God, to put the phrasing of a message above the message itself. To reach the hearts of the hearers, the sermon must be delivered. It is only half delivered when the speaker cannot utter it with original fire and force, when he merely repeats words that were conceived hours or weeks before, and hence are like champagne that has lost its fizz. The reading preacher's eyes are tied down to his manuscript. He cannot give the audience the benefit of his expression. How long would a play fill a theater if the actors held their cue books in hand and read their parts? Imagine Patrick Henry reading his famous speech, Peter the Hermit, manuscript in hand, exhorting the Crusaders, Napoleon constantly looking at his papers, addressing the army at the pyramids, or Jesus reading the Sermon on the Mount. These speakers were so full of their subjects, their general preparation had been so richly adequate, that there was no necessity for a manuscript, either to refer to or to serve as an outward and visible sign of their preparedness. No event was ever so dignified that it required an artificial attempt at speech-making. Call an essay by its right name, but never call it a speech. Perhaps the most dignified of events is a supplication to the Creator. If you ever listen to the reading of an original prayer, you must have felt its superficiality. Regardless of what the theories may be about manuscript delivery, the fact remains that it does not work out with efficiency. Avoid it whenever at all possible. Committing the written speech and speaking from memory. This method has certain points in its favor. If you have time and leisure, it is possible to polish and rewrite your ideas until they are expressed in clear, concise terms. Pope sometimes spent a whole day in perfecting one couplet. Gibbon consumed 20 years gathering material for and rewriting the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Although you cannot devote such painstaking preparation to a speech, you should take time to eliminate useless words, crowd whole paragraphs into a sentence, and choose proper illustrations. Good speeches, like plays, are not written, they are rewritten. The National Cash Register Company follows this plan with their most efficient selling organization. They require their salesmen to memorize verbatim a selling talk. They maintain that there is one best way of putting their selling arguments, and they insist that each salesman use this ideal way rather than employ any haphazard phrases that may come to his mind at the moment. The method of writing and committing has been adopted by many noted speakers. Julius Caesar, Robert Ingersoll, and on some occasions Wendell Phillips were distinguished examples. The wonderful effects achieved by some famous actors were, of course, accomplished through the delivery of memorized lines. The inexperienced speaker must be warned before attempting this method of delivery that it is difficult and trying. It requires much skill to make it efficient. The memorized lines of the young speaker will usually sound like memorized words and repel. If you want to hear an example, listen to a department store demonstrator repeat her memorized lingo about the newest furniture polish or breakfast food. It requires training to make a memorized speech sound fresh and spontaneous, and unless you have a fine native memory, in each instance the finished product necessitates much labor. Should you forget a part of your speech or miss a few words, you are liable to be so confused that, like Mark Twain's guide in Rome, you will be compelled to repeat your lines from the beginning. On the other hand, you may be so taken up with trying to recall your written words that you will not abandon yourself to the spirit of your address, and so fail to deliver it with that spontaneity which is so vital to forceful delivery. But do not let these difficulties frighten you. If committing seems best to you, give it a faithful trial. Do not be deterred by its pitfalls, but by resolute practice avoid them. One of the best ways to rise superior to these difficulties is to do as Dr. Wallace Radcliffe often does: commit without writing the speech, making practically all the preparation mentally, without putting pen to paper. A laborious but effective way of cultivating both mind and memory. You will find it excellent practice, both for memory and delivery, to commit the specimen speeches found in this volume and declaim them with all attention to the principles we have put before you. William Ellery Channing, himself a distinguished speaker, years ago had this to say of practice in declamation: "Is there not an amusement, having an affinity with the drama, which might be usefully introduced among us? I mean recitation, a work of genius, recited by a man of fine taste, enthusiasm, and powers of elocution, is a very pure and high gratification. Were this art cultivated and encouraged, great numbers, now insensible to the most beautiful compositions, might be waked up to their excellence and power." Speaking from notes. The third and most popular method of delivery is probably also the best one for the beginner. Speaking from notes is not ideal delivery, but we learn to swim in shallow water before going out beyond the ropes. Make a definite plan for your discourse. For a fuller discussion, see Chapter 18. And set down the points somewhat in the fashion of a lawyer's brief or a preacher's outline. Here is a sample of very simple notes. Attention! Roman numeral I. Introduction. Attention indispensable to the performance of any great work. Anecdote. Roman numeral II. Defined and illustrated. Arabic 1. From common observation. Arabic 2. From the lives of great men. Carlyle, Robert E. Lee. Roman numeral III. Its relation to other mental powers. Arabic 1. Reason. Arabic 2. Imagination. Arabic 3. Memory. Arabic 4. Will. Anecdote. Roman numeral IV. Attention may be cultivated. Arabic 1. Involuntary attention. Arabic 2. Voluntary attention. Examples. Roman numeral V. Conclusion. The consequences of inattention and of attention. Few briefs would be so precise as this one, for with experience a speaker learns to use little tricks to attract his eye. He may underscore a catchword heavily, draw a red circle around a pivotal idea, enclose the keyword of an anecdote in a wavy-lined box, and so on indefinitely. These points are worth remembering, for nothing so eludes the swift glancing eye of the speaker as the sameness of typewriting, or even a regular pen script. So unintentional a thing as a blot on the page may help you to remember a big point in your brief, perhaps by association of ideas. An inexperienced speaker would probably require fuller notes than the specimen given. Yet that way lies danger, for the complete manuscript is but a short remove from the copious outline. Use as few notes as possible. They may be necessary for the time being, but do not fail to look upon them as a necessary evil. And even when you lay them before you, refer to them only when compelled to do so. Make your notes as full as you please in preparation, but by all means condense them for platform use. Extemporaneous speech. Surely this is the ideal method of delivery. It is far and away the most popular with the audience, and the favorite method of the most efficient speakers. Extemporaneous speech has sometimes been made to mean unprepared speech, and indeed it is too often precisely that. But in no such sense do we recommend it strongly to speakers old and young. On the contrary, to speak well without notes requires all the preparation which we discussed so fully in the chapter on fluency, while yet relying upon the inspiration of the hour for some of your thoughts and much of your language. You had better remember, however, that the most effective inspiration of the hour is the inspiration you yourself bring to it, bottled up in your spirit and ready to infuse itself into the audience. If you extemporize, you can get much closer to your audience. In a sense, they appreciate the task you have before you and send out their sympathy. Extemporize, and you will not have to stop and fumble around amidst your notes. You can keep your eye afire with your message and hold your audience with your very glance. You yourself will feel their response as you read the effects of your warm, spontaneous words written on their countenances. Sentences written out in the study are liable to be dead and cold when resurrected before the audience. When you create as you speak, you conserve all the native fire of your thought. You can enlarge on one point or omit another, just as the occasion or the mood of the audience may demand. It is not possible for every speaker to use this. The most difficult of all methods of delivery and least of all can it be used successfully without much practice. But it is the ideal towards which all should strive. One danger in this method is that you may be led aside from your subject into bypaths. To avoid this peril, firmly stick to your mental outline. Practice speaking from a memorized brief until you gain control. Join a debating society. Talk, 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 and always extemporize. You may make a fool of yourself once or twice, but is that too great a price to pay for success? Notes, like crutches, are only a sign of weakness. Remember that the power of your speech depends to some extent upon the view your audience holds of you. General Grant's words as president were more powerful than his words as a Missouri farmer. If you would appear in the light of an authority, be one. Make notes on your brain instead of on paper. Joint methods of delivery. A modification of the second method has been adopted by many great speakers, particularly lecturers who are compelled to speak on a wide variety of subjects day after day. Such speakers often commit their addresses to memory, but keep their manuscripts in flexible book form before them, turning several pages at a time. They feel safer for having a sheet anchor to windward. But it is an anchor nevertheless, and hinders rapid, free sailing, though it drag never so slightly. Other speakers throw out a little lighter anchor by keeping before them a rather full outline of their written and committed speech. Others again write and commit a few important parts of the address, the introduction, the conclusion, some vital argument, some pat illustration, and depend on the hour for the language of the rest. This method is well adapted to speaking, either with or without notes. Some speakers read from manuscript the most important parts of their speeches, and utter the rest extemporaneously. Thus, what we have called joint methods of delivery are open to much personal variation. You must decide for yourself which is best for you, for the occasion, for your subject, for your audience. For these four factors all have their individual claims. Whatever form you choose, do not be so weakly indifferent as to prefer the easy way. Choose the best way, whatever it costs you in time and effort. And of this, be assured, only the practiced speaker can hope to gain both conciseness of argument and conviction in manner, polish of language and power in delivery, finish of style and fire in utterance. Questions and exercises. 1. Which in your judgment is the most suitable of delivery for you? Why? 2. What objections can you offer to A. Memorizing the entire speech, B. Reading from manuscript, C. Using notes, D. Speaking from memorized outline or notes, E. Any of the joint methods? 3. What is there to commend in delivering a speech in any of the foregoing methods? 4. Can you suggest any combination of methods that you have found efficacious? 5. What methods, according to your observation, do most successful speakers use? 6. Select some topic from the list at the end of Chapter 11. Narrow the theme so as to make it specific, and deliver a short address utilizing the 4 methods mentioned in 4 different deliveries of the speech. 7. Select one of the joint methods and apply it to the delivery of the same address. 8. Which method do you prefer and why? 9. From the list of subjects in the appendix, select a theme and deliver a 5-minute address without notes, but make careful preparation without putting your thoughts on paper. Note: it is earnestly hoped that instructors will not pass this stage of the work without requiring of their students much practice in the delivery of original speeches, in the manner that seems, after some experiment, to be best suited to the student's gifts. Students who are studying alone should be equally exacting in demand upon themselves. One point is most important. It is easy to learn to read a speech. Therefore, it is much more urgent that the pupil should have much practice in speaking from notes and speaking without notes. At this stage, pay more attention to manner than to matter. The succeeding chapters take up the composition of the address. Be particularly insistent upon frequent and thorough review of the principles of delivery discussed in the preceding chapters. End of section 16. Recording by Bill Mosley, Frelsburg, Texas, USA.
Chapter 17. Thought and Reserve Power. Providence is always on the side of the last reserve. Napoleon Bonaparte. So mightiest powers by deepest calms are fed, and sleep how oft in the things that gentlest be. Barry Cornwall, The Sea in Calm. What would happen if you should overdraw your bank account? As a rule, the check would be protested, but if you were on friendly terms with the bank, your check might be honored, and you would be called upon to make good the overdraft. Nature has no such favorites, therefore extends no credits. She is as relentless as a gasoline tank. When the gas is all used, the machine stops. It is as reckless for a speaker to risk going before an audience without having something in reserve as it is for the motorist to essay a long journey in the wilds without enough gasoline in sight. But in what does a speaker's reserve power consist? In a well-founded reliance on his general and particular grasp of his subject, in the quality of being alert and resourceful in thought, particularly in the ability to think while on his feet, and in that self-possession which makes one the captain of all his own forces, bodily and mental. The first of these elements, adequate preparation, and the last, self-reliance, were discussed fully in the chapters on self-confidence and fluency, so they will be touched only incidentally here. Besides, the next chapter will take up specific methods of preparation for public speaking. Therefore, the central theme of this chapter is the second of the elements of reserve power, thought. The mental storehouse. An empty mind, like an empty larder, may be a serious matter or not. All will depend on the available resources. If there is no food in the cupboard, the housewife does not nervously rattle the empty dishes. She telephones the grocer. If you have no ideas, do not rattle your empty ers and ahs, but get some ideas, and don't speak until you do get them. This, however, is not being what the old New England housekeeper used to call forehanded. The real solution of the problem of what to do with an empty head is never to let it become empty. In the artesian wells of Dakota, the water rushes to the surface and leaps a score of feet above the ground. The secret of this exuberant flow is of course the great supply below, crowding to get out. What is the use of stopping to prime a mental pump when you can fill your life with the resources for an artesian well? It is not enough to have merely enough. You must have more than enough. Then the pressure of your mass of thought and feeling will maintain your flow of speech and give you the confidence and poise that denote reserve power. To be away from home with only the exact return fare leaves a great deal to circumstances. Reserve power is magnetic. It does not consist in giving the idea that you are holding something in reserve, but rather in the suggestion that the audience is getting the cream of your observation, reading, experience, feeling, thought. To have reserve power, therefore, you must have enough milk of material on hand to supply sufficient cream. But how shall we get the milk? There are two ways. The one is first-hand, from the cow. The other is second-hand, from the milkman. The seeing eye. Some sage has said, "For 1,000 men who can speak, there is only one who can think. For 1,000 men who can think, there is only one who can see." To see and to think is to get your milk from your own cow. When the one man in a million who can see comes along, we call him master. Old Mr. Holbrook, of Cranford, asked his guest what color ash buds were in March. She confessed she did not know, to which the old gentleman answered, "I knew you didn't." "No more did I, an old fool that I am, till this young man comes and tells me. Black as ash buds in March, and I've lived all my life in the country. More shame for me not to know. Black, they are jet black, madam." This young man, referred to by Mr. Holbrook, was Tennyson. Henry Ward Beecher said, quote, "I do not believe that I have ever met a man on the street that I did not get from him some element for a sermon. I never see anything in nature which does not work towards that for which I give the strength of my life. The material for my sermons is all the time following me and swarming up around me." End quote. Instead of saying only one man in a million can see, it would strike nearer the truth to say that none of us sees with perfect understanding more than a fraction of what passes before our eyes. Yet this faculty of acute and accurate observation is so important that no man ambitious to lead can neglect it. The next time you are in a car, look at those who sit opposite you and see what you can discover of their habits, occupations, ideals, nationalities, environments, education, and so on. You may not see a great deal the first time, but practice will reveal astonishing results. Transmute every incident of your day into a subject for a speech or an illustration. Translate all that you see into terms of speech. When you can describe all that you have seen in definite words, you are seeing clearly. You are becoming the millionth man. De Maupassant's description of an author should also fit the public speaker. Quote, "His eye is like a suction pump, absorbing everything, like a pickpocket's hand, always at work. Nothing escapes him. He is constantly collecting material, gathering up glances, gestures, intentions, everything that goes on in his presence, the slightest look, the least act, the merest trifle." End quote. De Maupassant was himself a millionth man, a master. Ruskin took a common rock crystal and saw hidden within its stolid heart lessons which have not yet ceased to move men's lives. Beecher stood for hours before the window of a jewelry store, thinking out analogies between jewels and the souls of men. Gough saw in a single drop of water enough truth wherewith to quench the thirst of 5,000 souls. Thoreau sat so still in the shadowy woods that birds and insects came and opened up their secret lives to his eye. Emerson observed the soul of a man so long that at length he could say, "I cannot hear what you say, foreseeing what you are." Prior, for 3 years, studied the life of his babe, and so became an authority upon the child mind. Observation! Most men are blind. There are 1,000 times as many hidden truths and undiscovered facts about us today as have made discoverers famous, facts waiting for someone to pluck out the heart of their mystery. But so long as men go about the search with eyes that see not, so long will these hidden pearls lie in their shells. Not an orator, but who could more effectively point and feather his shafts were he to search nature rather than libraries? Too few can see sermons in stones and books in the running brooks, because they are so used to seeing merely sermons in books and only stones in running brooks. Sir Philip Sidney had a saying, "Look in thy heart and write." Massillon explained his astute knowledge of the human heart by saying, "I learned it by studying myself." Byron says of John Locke that all his knowledge of the human understanding was derived from studying his own mind. Since multiform nature is all about us, originality ought not to be so rare. How to Attract and Hold an Audience, J. Berg Eisenwein. The Thinking Mind. Thinking is doing mental arithmetic with facts. Add this fact to that, and you reach a certain conclusion. Subtract this truth from another, and you have a definite result. Multiply this fact by another, and have a precise product. See how many times this occurrence happens in that space of time, and you have reached a calculable dividend. In thought processes, you perform every known problem of arithmetic and algebra. That is why mathematics are such excellent mental gymnastics. But by the same token, thinking is work. Thinking takes energy. Thinking requires time, and patience, and broad information, and clear-headedness. Beyond a miserable little surface scratching, few people really think at all. Only 1 in 1,000, according to the pundit already quoted. So long as the present system of education prevails, and children are taught through the ear rather than through the eye, so long as they are expected to remember thoughts of others rather than think for themselves, this proportion will continue. 1 man in 1,000,000 will be able to see, and 1 in 1,000 to think. But however thoughtless a mind has been, there is promise of better things so soon as the mind detects its own lack of thought power. The first step is to stop regarding thought as the magic of the mind, to use Byron's expression, and see it as thought truly is, a weighing of ideas and a placing of them in relationships to each other. Ponder this definition and see if you have learned to think efficiently. Habitual thinking is just that, a habit. Habit comes of doing a thing repeatedly. The lower habits are acquired easily. The higher ones require deeper grooves if they are to persist. So we find that the thought habit comes only with resolute practice. Yet no effort will yield richer dividends. Persist in practice, and whereas you have been able to think only an inch deep into a subject, you will soon find that you can penetrate it a foot. Perhaps this homely metaphor will suggest how to begin the practice of consecutive thinking, by which we mean welding a number of separate thought links into a chain that will hold. Take one link at a time, see that each naturally belongs with the ones you link to it, and remember that a single missing link means no chain. Thinking is the most fascinating and exhilarating of all mental exercises. Once realize that your opinion on a subject does not represent the choice you have made between what Dr. Cerebrum has written and Professor Cerebellum has said, but is the result of your own earnestly applied brain energy, and you will gain a confidence in your ability to speak on that subject that nothing will be able to shake. Your thought will have given you both power and reserve power. Someone has condensed the relation of thought to knowledge in these pungent, homely lines. Don't give me the man who thinks he thinks. Don't give me the man who thinks he knows. But give me the man who knows he thinks, and I have the man who knows he knows. Reading as a stimulus to thought. No matter how dry the cow, however, nor how poor our ability to milk, there is still the milkman. We can read what others have seen and felt and thought. Often, indeed, such records will kindle within us that pre-essential and vital spark, the desire to be a thinker. The following selection is taken from one of Dr. Newell Dwight Hillis's lectures, as given in A Man's Value to Society. Dr. Hillis is a most fluent speaker. He never refers to notes. He has reserve power. His mind is a veritable treasure house of facts and ideas. See how he draws from a knowledge of 15 different general or special subjects: geology, plant life, Palestine, chemistry, Eskimos, mythology, literature, the Nile, history, law, wit, evolution, religion, biography, and electricity. Surely it needs no sage to discover that the secret of this man's reserve power is the old secret of our artesian well, whose abundance surges from unseen depths. The uses of books and reading. Used by permission. Each Kingsley approaches a stone as a jeweler approaches a casket to unlock the hidden gems. Geikie causes the bit of hard coal to unroll the juicy bud, the thick odorous leaves, the pungent boughs, until the bit of carbon enlarges into the beauty of a tropic forest. That little book of Grant Allen's, called How Plants Grow, exhibits trees and shrubs as eating, drinking, and marrying. We see certain date groves in Palestine, and other date groves in the desert 100 miles away, and the pollen of the one carried upon the trade winds to the branches of the other. We see the tree with its strange system of waterworks, pumping the sap up through pipes and mains. We see the chemical laboratory in the branches, mixing flavor for the orange in one bough, mixing the juices of the pineapple in another. We behold the tree as a mother making each infant acorn ready against the long winter, rolling it in swathes soft and warm as wool blankets, wrapping it around with garments impervious to the rain, and finally slipping the infant acorn into a sleeping bag, like those the Eskimos gave Dr. Kane. At length we come to feel that the Greeks were not far wrong in thinking each tree had a dryad in it, animating it, protecting it against destruction, dying when the tree withered. Some Faraday shows us that each drop of water is a sheath for electrical forces sufficient to charge 800,000 Leyden jars, or drive an engine from Liverpool to London. Some Sir William Thomson tells us how hydrogen gas will chew up a large iron spike as a child's molars will chew off the end of a stick of candy. Thus each new book opens up some new and hitherto unexplored realm of nature. Thus books fulfill for us the legend of the wondrous glass that showed its owner all things distant and all things hidden. Through books our world becomes as a bud from the bower of God's beauty, the sun as a spark from the light of his wisdom, the sky as a bubble on the sea of his power. Therefore Mrs. Browning's words, "No child can be called fatherless who has God and his mother. No youth can be called friendless who has God and the companionship of good books." Books also advantage us in that they exhibit the unity of progress, the solidarity of the race, and the continuity of history. Authors lead us back along the pathway of law, of liberty or religion, and set us down in front of the great man in whose brain the principle had its rise. As the discoverer leads us from the mouth of the Nile back to the headwaters of Nyanza, so books exhibit great ideas and institutions, as they move forward, ever widening and deepening, like some Nile feeding many civilizations. For all the reforms of today go back to some reform of yesterday. Man's art goes back to Athens and Thebes. Man's laws go back to Blackstone and Justinian. Man's reapers and plows go back to the savage scratching the ground with his forked stick, drawn by the wild bullock. The heroes of liberty march forward in a solid column. Lincoln grasps the hand of Washington. Washington received his weapons at the hands of Hampden and Cromwell. The great Puritans lock hands with Luther and Savonarola. The unbroken procession brings us at length to him whose Sermon on the Mount was the very charter of liberty. It puts us under a divine spell to perceive that we are all co-workers with the great men, and yet single threads in the warp and woof of civilization. And when books have related us to our own age, and related all the epochs to God, whose providence is the Gulf Stream of history, these teachers go on to stimulate us to new and greater achievements. Alone, man is an unlighted candle. The mind needs some book to kindle its faculties. Before Byron began to write, he used to give half an hour to reading some favorite passage. The thought of some great writer never failed to kindle Byron into a creative glow, even as a match lights the kindlings upon the grate. In these burning, luminous moods, Byron's mind did its best work. The true book stimulates the mind, as no wine can ever quicken the blood. It is reading that brings us to our best, and rouses each faculty to its most vigorous life. We recognize this as pure cream, and if it seems at first to have its secondary source in the friendly milkman, let us not forget that the theme is the uses of books and reading. Dr. Hillis both sees and thinks. It is fashionable just now to decry the value of reading. We read, we are told, to avoid the necessity of thinking for ourselves. Books are for the mentally lazy. Though this is only a half-truth, the element of truth it contains is large enough to make us pause. Put yourself through a good old Presbyterian soul-searching self-examination, and if reading from thought laziness is one of your sins, confess it. No one can shrive you of it but yourself. Do penance for it by using your own brains, for it is a transgression that dwarfs the growth of thought and destroys mental freedom. At first the penance will be trying, but at the last you will be glad in it. Reading should entertain, give information, or stimulate thought. Here, however, we are chiefly concerned with information and stimulation of thought. What shall I read for information? The ample page of knowledge, as Gray tells us, is rich with the spoils of time, and these are ours for the price of a theater ticket. You may command Socrates and Marcus Aurelius to sit beside you and discourse of their choicest, hear Lincoln at Gettysburg and Pericles at Athens, storm the Bastille with Hugo, and wander through paradise with Dante. You may explore darkest Africa with Stanley, penetrate the human heart with Shakespeare, chat with Carlyle about heroes, and delve with the Apostle Paul into the mysteries of faith. The general knowledge and the inspiring ideas that men have collected through ages of toil and experiment are yours for the asking. The sage of Chelsea was right. The true university of these days is a collection of books. To master a worthwhile book is to master much else besides. Few of us, however, make perfect conquest of a volume without first owning it physically. To read a borrowed book may be a joy, but to assign your own book a place of its own on your own shelves, be they few or many, to love the book and feel of its worn cover, to thumb it over slowly, page by page, to pencil its margins in agreement or in protest, to smile or thrill with its remembered pungencies. No mere book borrower could ever sense all that delight. The reader who possesses books in this double sense finds also that his books possess him, and the volumes which most firmly grip his life are likely to be those it has cost him some sacrifice to own. These lightly come-by titles, which Mr. Fatpurse selects, perhaps by proxy, can scarcely play the guide, philosopher, and friend in crucial moments as do the books, long coveted, joyously attained, that are welcomed into the lives, and not merely the libraries, of us others who are at once poorer and richer. So it is scarcely too much to say that of all the many ways in which an owned, a mastered, book is like to a human friend, the truest ways are these. A friend is worth making sacrifices for, both to gain and to keep, and our loves go out most dearly to those into whose inmost lives we have sincerely entered. When you have not the advantage of the test of time by which to judge books, investigate as thoroughly as possible the authority of the books you read. Much that is printed and passes current is counterfeit. I read it in a book is to many a sufficient warranty of truth, but not to the thinker. What book? Asks the careful mind. Who wrote it? What does he know about the subject, and what right has he to speak on it? Who recognizes him as authority? With what other recognized authorities does he agree or disagree? Being caught trying to pass counterfeit money, even unintentionally, is an unpleasant situation. Beware lest you circulate spurious coin. Above all, seek reading that makes you use your own brains. Such reading must be alive with fresh points of view, packed with special knowledge, and deal with subjects of vital interest. Do not confine your reading to what you already know you will agree with. Opposition wakes one up. The other road may be the better, but you will never know it unless you give it the once-over. Do not do all your thinking and investigating in front of given QEDs, merely assembling reasons to fill in between your theorem and what you want to prove will get you nowhere. Approach each subject with an open mind and, once sure that you have thought it out thoroughly and honestly, have the courage to abide by the decision of your own thought, but don't brag about it afterward. No book on public speaking will enable you to discourse on the tariff if you know nothing about the tariff. Knowing more about it than the other man will be your only hope for making the other man listen to you. Take a group of men discussing a governmental policy of which someone says, "It is socialistic." That will commend the policy to Mr. A, who believes in socialism, but condemn it to Mr. B, who does not. It may be that neither had considered the policy beyond noticing that its surface color was socialistic. The chances are, furthermore, that neither Mr. A nor Mr. B has a definite idea of what socialism really is, for as Robert Louis Stevenson says, man lives not by bread alone, but chiefly by catchwords. If you are of this group of men and have observed this proposed government policy, and investigated it, and thought about it, what you have to say cannot fail to command their respect and approval, for you will have shown them that you possess a grasp of your subject and, to adopt an exceedingly expressive bit of slang, then some. Questions and exercises. 1. Robert Houdin trained his son to give one swift glance at a shop window in passing and be able to report accurately a surprising number of its contents. Try this several times on different windows and report the result. 2. What effect does reserve power have on an audience? 3. What are the best methods for acquiring reserve power? 4. What is the danger of too much reading? 5. Analyze some speech that you have read or heard and notice how much real information there is in it. Compare it with Dr. Hillis's speech on Brave Little Belgium, page 394. 6. Write out a 3-minute speech on any subject you choose. How much information and what new ideas does it contain? Compare your speech with the extract on page 191 from Dr. Hillis's The Uses of Books and Reading. 7. Have you ever read a book on the practice of thinking? If so, give your impressions of its value. Note, there are a number of excellent books on the subject of thought and the management of thought. The following are recommended as being especially helpful. Thinking and Learning to Think, Nathan C. Schaefer. Talks to Students on the Art of Study, Kramer. As a Man Thinketh, Allen. 8. Define A. Logic, B. Mental philosophy or mental science, C. Psychology, D. Abstract. End of section 17.